Meeting started. Okay, looks like we're good to go. Well, welcome everyone to today's meeting of the working group that is to address the state and municipal statutory plan process. We're part of the Connecticut's Commission on Connecticut's Development and Future that was formed last year. And it's great to have a number of our presenters here today. Because we're such a small group, I wondered if we could just briefly do introductions and if folks could say who they are and where they're from. And I'll begin by saying I'm State Representative Kristen McCarthy-Vahey, and I co-chair the Planning and Development Committee. I also co-chair the Continuing Committee, which is responsible for the State Plan of Conservation and Development, which I'm thrilled to say passed the legislature this year. And I also have the privilege of co-chairing this group with Aaron Kemple, who's not able to be here with us today. So I will go next to Kyle, then Glenn, then Savannah.
Hi everyone, Kyle Scheel, West Hartford resident, Town of Manchester employee, and the senior planner for comprehensive planning and for long range planning, and glad to be here.
Great. I'm Glenn Chalder from Planometrics. I've been a town planner. I've worked for real estate development companies and been a planning consultant for the last 30 years, working with towns all over Connecticut. And I'm excited to be here as well.
Wonderful. Savannah, and then John and Charles.
My name is Savannah Nicole Villalba, and I go by SN. I work for the Naugatuck Valley Council of Governments, and I currently live in Simsbury.
And then my apologies, I was forgetting Charles, John, and then Emmeline.
Hi, Charlie Gardner. I'm an attorney with Dorff and Nelson. I'm also on the Legislative Council in Newtown, Connecticut, where I reside.
Welcome, John and Emmeline.
Sure. Hi, guys. I'm John. Good to see everyone. I have worked in multiple municipalities, most recently with the city of Derby as assistant to the mayor and deputy chief of staff. And I've been around the legislature process for some time. So that's my background, and I currently reside in New Britain.
Wonderful. Emmeline, then Lynn, and then Eric.
Hi, I'm Emmeline Harrigan. I'm the Assistant Planning Director for the town of Fairfield. I currently reside in Milford. I was formerly the Assistant City Planner there and have worked for a Regional Council of Governments here in Connecticut and also worked on the West Coast for the city of West Hollywood in California.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lynn Haig. I am Director of Planning for the city of Bridgeport.
Thank you. Eric, and then Kevin.
Hi, I'm Eric Lindquist. I live out in Griswold, Connecticut, and I work for the Office of Policy and Management, where I'm a land use planner in the Intergovernmental Policy and Planning Division.
Thank you. Kevin, then Rachel.
Hi, everyone. Kevin Alvarez, Director of Legislative Affairs for the City of New Haven, which is where I reside.
Thank you. Rachel, then Stewart.
Hi, everyone. First of all, I apologize for being off camera today, but I'm Rachel DeSenza. I am from New Canaan, Connecticut. I would say I'm the group's layperson. I'm in health insurance as a compliance officer, and I do project and program implementation. Nice to meet everyone.
Thanks, Rachel. Stewart. Stewart, are you able to connect by audio? Are you here? Okay. I don't know if I'm realizing it's not me freezing. Okay. And then Will Cromwell is with us, and we are, just so that you all know, in terms of our staff and technical support, we have a few people helping us right now, and we're in transition. So just in terms of communication with the group and the committee, if you have questions, you can reach out to me directly. You've also been receiving communication from Alex Pattacini. And Alex, do you want to introduce yourself? There you go.
Yeah, so I'm Alex Pattacini. I'm a legislative clerk with the Majority Leader's Office, and I handle all the scheduling for the commission meetings.
Great, thank you so much. So we have today a conversation about the municipal plans of conservation and development and how they relate to the state plan and how that process works together. We have on the agenda today presentations from Lynn, Emmeline, Kyle, and Glenn. Actually, that's not the order they're on the agenda, but and then we'll have questions for them and discussion based on the conversation as presented. And I'm actually going to go out of order a little bit. I'm going to go Kyle, Glenn, Emmeline, and Lynn. I know that some folks have a hard stop because this is a busy time with all the plans that municipalities are working on. But we will get as far as we can with as many people as we can. Because we're a smaller group, I know we're scheduled to 5:30. We may not actually go that long, and I probably just jinxed it. We probably will. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Kyle, to kick us off.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Eric had a really good suggestion. I'm glad you suggested Glenn. Eric, one of your suggestions was it's good to have a mix of towns that take it seriously and not seriously. So I think Manchester takes it seriously. I'll let you be the judge of that. And Glenn, I'm looking to your accounts of maybe some of the towns that don't take it seriously, and I'm sure they'll be anonymized, but I am curious to see what you say. I'll share my screen. I do have some slides if that's possible. Here we go. And can folks see that, yes or no? Just give me a quick yes or no.
Yes.
Good. All right. So Manchester's current plan of conservation development is called Manchester 2020. It was adopted in 2012. So it's literally due for a fresh update, which we are currently in the process of as we speak. Like I said, I do think we are one of the communities that takes it seriously, certainly at the staff and commission level. We're constantly referring to it, and I'll get to that in a little bit. In terms of how it connects to the state POCD, it's right there front loaded in the table of contents. We literally reference the state's growth management principles. And I wasn't here at the time, but my understanding was those were used to kickstart discussions for the charrettes and workshops that they had in 2011, through 2012, through the writing of this plan. So it's right there front and center. And I think they're good, flexible principles that could be, applied and adapted to any community, really. We certainly tailored them in the final plan, but as a conversation starter, my feedback from my predecessor was those principles were very helpful. And later on in the plan, we do cross-reference it in more granular detail about the stuff that we did in the plan and how it specifically does or does not comply or is consistent with the state POCD. So there's probably 10 or 12 more of these tables to the right. So we kind of go line by line and see, yes, is it consistent? So in this plan, we found that we were consistent with 29 out of the 45 state policy principles. The majority of them, of our goals and strategies in the plan were consistent with the state POCD. So front end, back end, we reference it initially, then we cross-check it at the end to make sure it's consistent. And we took that pretty seriously. We wanted to be consistent with the state POCD. One wrinkle I think that's maybe different from other POCs you may find interesting is a quote unquote proposed character map. It's not quite a land use map, and there's been some debate in legislation, obviously, about the use of the word quote unquote character in plans. In this, I would just say it's not a technical land use map anyway. It's more of a qualitative sense of place, vibe, whatever you want to call it. You can see there's descriptions on the right here. But it's really used to be a qualitative sense of how a place feels in terms of physical characteristics, building types, heights, infrastructure, how walkable it is. It's intentionally flexible, and you're really just kind of describing a place rather than prescribing something specific. And so that was kind of the intentional. So yes, the word character has become a bit of a hot button issue, but I think the way we use it really pertains strictly to physical characteristics. So if we had to, for example, literally delete the word character out of our plan, we could do so without too much difficulty because the rest of it has enough meat on the bones, so to speak. And here's some specific examples. So to the right, you see examples from literally in Manchester. So someone reading this plan could look at each of those photos and say, oh, okay, that's where I live, or I drive by there every day, or that's where my friend lives, and relate it to the description on the right, or on the middle, excuse me. So, okay, I live in suburban area. It's residential lots are landscaped. Most streets have sidewalks on one side, et cetera, et cetera. So it kind of relates to what they see every day in the picture and what the professional planners and designers kind of would describe it, in other words. And then further on in the implementation section, we drill down a little further. So we have the goals and the sub strategies, and we specifically relate them to the proposed character areas. So for example, promote walkable neighborhoods. You're not necessarily got to try that in a natural or rural agricultural area, but you certainly would in a core neighborhood. So what your goal is and what your strategy is dependent on the context of the area and what you're trying to achieve. So we just kind of try and weave it through the meat of the plan and the implementation section. And then we have quarterly progress checks. The town of Manchester has every department has to do performance measures, and this is one of them we did. It's really more rigorous than it actually looks. This is really just a matter of every quarter we sit down as a staff and say, what are we working on? We go through every goal and every strategy. Did we work on it? Yes or no? Did we pass a reg? Did we have a workshop? Was one of the capital projects implemented or completed? So it's more of a conversation and we just kind of check it off. So it's sort of false precision here, but it's mostly the intention is the point here. Make sure we're talking about it quarterly. Make sure we're trying to work towards these goals, year over year. And then we're just recently, as we're starting this new process, we want to do an implementation update status, just so people can kind of get cynical, like, well, we're starting a new plan, but what did we do from the previous plan? And then when you think about it, it's, for us at least, it was quite a bit. That's why I intentionally put before and after photos. I try to pull in as many news articles as I could about open space acquisitions or before and after pictures. So the visual element was important. And we have a list of the specific items we did right here, for example. So to me, it was important to do this so people don't get cynical about the purpose of planning. You can see that stuff actually does change, year to year, and certainly within 10 years between the time you do plans. And one specific example for this group is to talk about, and the graphic is less important than the intent, but we're going through this right now as we update our processes. I would love to have a formal or process to connect towns with state staff or COG staff. And I know certainly staffing capacity is an issue wherever we are, but right now I'm just relying on personal relationships I have at DOT, COGs, and elsewhere to come join us with the POCD process and give their feedback. But to have it formalized, to have dedicated state staff, or maybe it's delegated to a COG, just to have that kind of cross-pollination would be really, really beneficial, I think. So just wanted to throw that out there as a concrete suggestion or thought for discussion. And what we're doing now is our current POCD. It's called Manchester Next. We are working with a Town Planning Urban Design Collaborative out of Tennessee. We have a brand for it, Manchester Next, the plan for everyone. This week is a Plan-a-Palooza, quote unquote, as they call it. It's like a lot of marketing things, you kind of roll your eyes at it at first, but then after a while, you kind of sticks in your head and you remember it. So it's literally this week, Monday through Thursday. Right after this meeting, in fact, I'm going to the final workshop presentation over at the high school. So it's been a fun week, and we're currently just right in the middle of it. And one last thing I wanted to talk about just quickly, why we hired these firms is it's important to have like a plan that people want to look at, like everyday people want to look at. And I think firms and communities really need to kind of step up their game in terms of graphic design and graphic appeal. The barriers to entry to have stuff look good is just lower now. So it's really a matter of just making it intentional and hiring a graphic designer that can make your plans look appealing, that the average person would want to read. And that's kind of what connects it to everyday people, is it just, oh, that's the plan and it looks good and something you could put on your coffee table if you wanted to. So graphic appeal is an important consideration to keep in mind. And with that, I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. And especially thank you, given the fact that you are literally in the middle of your Planapalooza. And yes, major clapping, and your fellow planners are going, oh my gosh, I can't even believe he's here. Right?
Yeah.
So I appreciate so much what you had to say. And, you know, given timing, and I think we're gonna just let you slide off and see if Emmeline and Lynn and Glenn can cover us. But does anyone have any thoughts or reactions as we go here? If the rest of the presenters, I think we'll wait until the three of you.
For what it's worth, I'm good until about 4:45, 4:50. So I'll hang out for a little bit, and I'll just, you know, I'll slip out quietly if I have to.
Okay. But nonetheless, anyone have any kind of immediate responses or thoughts?
Just one quick thing, Kristen. First of all, Kyle, great presentation. Absolutely loved it. Just for the record, I assume that we're gonna get copies of these presentations in our email afterwards, just so that time to review them more in detail.
Thank you for asking that, and just also to maybe blow it up a little bit larger on our screen for some of us whose eyes might need that help. Yes, Kyle, if you can, and anyone else who might have slides today, just share those with Alex and with myself. That would be wonderful.
All right, thanks, Representative.
All right, well, let's keep moving in the conversation then, if we can. I'm going to turn it over to you, Glenn. Glenn, we need you to unmute first. Okay,
Yes,
there you
we
are.
go.
Oh, you were unmuted. Let's see. Does this
There we
help?
go.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that. So what let me get back to that screen up.
For some reason, you're unmuted again. I think there's or you're muted again, excuse me. So we can hear you.
Yeah, you should have me now.
There you go.
I apologize. So technical defect. I gotta be honest, that's the first time I've had one in a long time with Zoom. So I apologize for that. I
No
muted
worries.
myself for you, Kyle. So that's what caused the challenge there. So excited to be here today. I'm Glenn Chalder from Planometrics. Planometrics is a planning and zoning consulting firm. Kyle indicated we've done work in a lot of communities around the state, from large to small. I'm going to try to bring some of that experience into your work here today. I think the important thing to recognize initially, for those of you who don't work with planning or zoning on a daily basis, is that originally the concept was that planning and zoning were going to be interconnected and intertwined. And there's generally statutory language which says zoning regulation shall be made in accordance with a comprehensive plan. In most other states in the country, comprehensive plan means like the master plan, what we call a plan of conservation and development. It's got a slightly different meaning in Connecticut, but it's not germane to our discussion today. But kudos to Connecticut. Hartford was established one of the first city plan commissions in the country. So we have a long tradition here in Connecticut addressing this particular issue. And just to give you a sense of the longevity of these types of efforts, the federal government established the Standard State Zoning Enabling Act about a century ago. And then the Standard City Planning Enabling Act followed 5 years later. So we've been doing some of this stuff for quite a while. Generally speaking, the Plan of Conservation and Development is intended to focus on the physical, economic, and social development of a community. So it's meant to cover a lot of different bases. Some plans have narrower focuses, some bigger. But really, I think the whole focus of a plan is what do you want to be when you grow up? And so it's a planning process on a regular basis, at least according to Connecticut law, once every 10 years to address that kind of situation. There's a couple of different types of plans that can occur at the local level. One type of plan is what we might call vision attainment. And I think as Kyle pointed out, the charrette process and Planapalooza is really trying to understand what the vision of the community for the future is, and how to accomplish that. There can also be plans which are problem resolution, such as affordable housing plans, where we need to figure out how to address those situations. Plans can be comprehensive in nature, citywide, for example. They can also be focused on a particular area or a particular topic, and different levels of geography. I think my next set of slides are going to be about the local connection, but clearly this also ties into the state plan. I think for most local plans, there's a couple of major components to go along with that. An introduction in terms of what the plan is all about. At the end, the conclusion and implementation, and where we really kind of focus in on consistency with the state plan. Manchester is slightly different in the sense that they put the state plan up front. But within the plan, most sections or chapters focus on what I consider to be sort of the four main issues these days. One of which is sustainability. And this is not just the concept of ecologic sustainability, but social and economic sustainability. The world is changing so fast these days. The communities that don't keep up on their plan are falling behind in terms of the types of situations the community faces. Most residents in a community are focused in on conservation strategies, things that they want to preserve or protect. They're kind of averse to change. And so it's an important element, but it can't be the only driver of a plan. Another section is development strategies. Think how community might want to guide growth and change in the future. What do we aspire to? I think Manchester and the work that they're doing is sketches and visions of what can be and what could or should be the key parts of a plan. And then also I think infrastructure, which is the basic facilities and services that make a community work. Schools, town hall, fire department, public works, the transportation network, pedestrian circulation, bicycles, transit, water, sewer infrastructure, cell phones, internet, all of that stuff is also an important element in the plan. Generally speaking, a plan preparation generally takes a year or two. You've got to gear up for it, go through the process and get it adopted. The plan elements often include an inventory of what's going on today. Where are we? Where are we headed? An evaluation or assessment of those situations is like that future outcome is not all that we can be or should be. So, where do we want to go from here? And then recommendations about how we get there. And I think there's often two types of recommendations in a plan: policies, which are ongoing activities or directions that never really get crossed off as being implemented or completed. And then you've got action steps, which is change the zoning regulations to do this. And some communities drop the ball here at implementation of action steps. I'm just delighted to hear what Manchester has been doing, because it clearly shows that it's become embedded, if you will, in their internal processes. But if communities peak at adoption of the plan rather than on implementation of the plan, they haven't wasted the planning effort, but they haven't accomplished everything that they could. And so if we think about a 10-year cycle for plans, if it takes 1 to 2 years to prepare the plan, that leaves 8 to 9 years for implementation. And if a community is inactive during that time, it's not achieving everything that it could. Some of the opportunities that a community can get from preparing and updating a plan is that they affirm or modify their overall vision for the community. They get consensus on future directions. This is a picture here of a rowing scull with I don't know how many people in it. But if you can get everybody rowing in the same direction, it's amazing what can happen in a municipality. If, on the other hand, everybody's dancing to a different drummer, it's amazing how ineffective a municipality can be. So one of the values, I think, of a plan is getting to consensus and then moving forward. And it has a technical element too in terms of avoiding spot zoning. When a plan points out, even for a small area, that this is something that fits in with the overall vision of the community, it can avoid claims of spot zoning. I think one of the challenges that can happen in municipalities is inertia. People don't always like change. Groupthink, that, you know, people get together and they all pat each other on the back, but they're not really or willing to answer the tough questions or even ask the tough questions. So that's where I think professional staff can really help the community kind of confront some of those situations and ask the difficult questions. And social media and politics can create their own set of issues or problems. If a plan becomes a political event during an election season, it's generally not a good outcome, not a good situation. Plans can be prepared in a lot of different situations. A commission can do it by itself, but if they don't have staff input, it's really hard because you've got different voices. Not generally speaking, one person can't do it by themselves. Most commissions meet once or twice a month, trying to find the time to get this done without the knowledge of the implications can really become a challenge. I think a better approach is an ad hoc committee, where now we can expand the membership a little bit and bring in other boards and committees that are involved in these important issues. I think you can bring in a consultant to help with key elements of the plan. I think even in Manchester, they've got a well-staffed department, but they've brought in a consultant to assist with the visualization, coaching, advising, supporting on the plan, asking hard questions. I sometimes joke with my clients that I provide plausible deniability. I can come up with the crazy ideas and they can blame me, but we get it out on the table and we talk about it. And I think that's important. And of course, you can hire a consultant to do the full plan, but I think it's always got to be sort of a team effort. Now, Manchester's really adopted a very effective approach, if you will. I didn't know or didn't remember that there were 45 different state policies here, but I'm doing some work right now with Kent. They're in the process of adopting their plan. And these are the 2 pages in our draft plan, which really sort of address this issue. The first of which is, as required by statute, does the plan and its recommendations, is it consistent with state and regional plans? And for quite some time, because the state plan hadn't been updated, we were sort of in a purgatory situation as to which state plan applied. And you were referring to the 2013 to 2018 plan, even though the year was 2019 or 2022. So it was a bit of a challenge for us. This is again an example, and we went through an analysis and concluded that they were consistent. And then, as Kyle had pointed out here on the following page, we have the summary of consistency with the state growth principles. And again, their plan is broken out a little bit differently. One of the things I think which is a bit of a challenge for this is that the state locational guide map has actually gotten, I think, less precise over time. It used to have different levels of criteria in terms of the number of conservation objectives that existed in certain areas. And so the color would get, you know, greener, and then the number of areas that promoted a growth type strategy, so it would get browner. And you could really start to get a sense of the nuances within the state plan as to different elements that apply. And the current plan really doesn't sort of focus in on those nuances. So sometimes it's hard. And I think the question of specificity, I know that in the past, there used to be applications to the continuing committee to modify the state plan of conservation and development because it was too specific. And I think that's something we would want to consider. I think for the future, the challenge we can have is that the state plan can lag behind on important issues. I think the state plan should be more anticipatory and visionary. You know, in 2017, the legislature adopted a requirement that every town had to prepare affordable housing plans, and they couldn't be more than 5 years old. Few did it before 2022, but perhaps if we really started and recognized the challenges that have always been here with regard to housing, we'd be further down the road. So I think the state can be a leader in talking about the issues that the municipalities need to be thinking about and kind of set the stage for that. And that can happen through statewide working groups to help prepare the plan. And that might occur during a 4-year period. And then 1 year for the legislature to adopt the plan. And if they don't adopt the plan, then it's adopted automatically. The issue is, if you don't act because of the calendar and it doesn't get on the calendar, it doesn't get the vote, it dies for 5 years or 2 years, whatever it's going to be. And I don't think that's the best outcome from a planning consideration. I think other things that the committee might want to think about in the future is carrots or sticks for consistency for municipalities. And even the requirement for state agencies, whether or not they have their own plans. Are those supposed to be consistent, or what's supposed to happen there? So I think there's a sort of informal relationship of things to think about. So that's my overview of planning related issues, and thank you for the opportunity to speak before you today.
Thank you very much, Glenn. And if you saw me smiling when you said the part about adopted if not acted on, I was smiling, smiling and crying maybe a little bit, but so I appreciate that. And I think we're going to keep going. And if you all don't mind, then have some conversation at the end to tie things together. But I appreciate the specifics of some of the things that you brought up, and that some of your questions at the end in terms of consistency as well. So those are some, there are just a few lines there, but those are some big questions. So next up we have Emmeline.
Okay, and I don't get alarmed at the number of slides I have. I'm just gonna move really quickly. So, let's see, did it go? Can you see my screen? Okay. So we're deep in the process of updating our plan of conservation and development. I will disclose that we actually started this process well before COVID, and we really got waylaid by the pandemic in terms of really finishing our process. You know, our last POCD is actually a weird hybrid of an original POCD that was written in 2000 and then was updated because the regional POCD was updated in 2016. So we're not up against a clock, but we have a very kind of inconsistent, kind of strange document that really doesn't address a lot of the statutory changes that have come into play, you know, kind of marginally since 2000 and certainly since 2015 or so. We have a lot of very significant changing trends in Fairfield. It's always been a fairly affluent community, but it's been a little bit more diverse. And we have a lot of stressors that are really affecting our community. So, you know, if you look at our median home sales price, we're currently at over $600,000 for median home sales price. And there's a big gap between our median income of at least, you know, about $20,000 between income and, you know, purchasing ability. And you can kind of see where this comes from when you look at kind of our past demographics. You know, our housing units since 2000 have grown by about 1,000, but our population has grown by about 4,000. One of the things that was really interesting and has informed our POCD update was a TOD plan that we did back in 2019 pre-pandemic. It was very well attended. People were very interested in looking at development opportunities near the Metro Center train station, which we kind of share with our neighbor in Bridgeport in terms of, you know, folks who really utilize that station. And one of the things that really came out of that study with our consultants was that, you know, 65% of Fairfield households are 1 or 2 person households. So, I mean, that really kind of feeds some of our stressors in terms of housing supply and, you know, what's really happening in terms of development. We really do need to introduce more multifamily. And I think our community has been pretty supportive of that. But, you know, one of the issues that also came out in our TOD study was that we only have 5% of our land area that's really zoned for commercial and potentially mixed use. We do have some as of right 2 to 4 family zones, but you know, it's really intense to try to kind of localize a lot of your development in such a very you know, concentrated area. So as we've kind of done outreach with our community, we've really kind of focused on very specific items. And, you know, so we've really kind of talked about conservation, economic development, and housing kind of paired together, and then infrastructure, you know, what limits our ability to grow and what are those areas that we need to preserve in order to help support the infrastructure that we have. And so we did kind of the classic workshop, you know, get out your pens, your markers and your sticky pads, and really kind of focused on, you know, getting them kind of interested in the geography and how that correlates to, you know, where we want to direct policy and goals. And, if you can see that little map, the key map in the upper left corner of this economic development map, only the red areas.
Can I interrupt you? So I was not sure if this was an intro, but I think I'm only seeing the first slide.
Oh,
I think what you probably have been talking through a number of slides, and
I
I
have done.
apologize. I should have probably done this earlier, but for whatever reason, is that what other people are seeing as well? I
Oh.
see heads nodding.
Oh, okay, sorry. It's for some odd reason, it said my screen sharing was paused. Well, you'll see the slide deck later. I don't want to take up too much time only because I think, we have other presenters, but okay, so can you see this slide now?
Yes.
Okay, so, for Fairfield, our economic development opportunities are limited by our geography and our present zoning, and our lack of sewer in a big northwest chunk of our municipality that also has a reservoir within it. And we have a lot of watershed areas. So it's challenging to really kind of focus development, but we think we do have a lot of opportunity for it. So, we had very structured workshop opportunities where we kind of, presented rules of engagement that allowed people to kind of think about change in a positive way, we hope. And they were very well attended. We did 3 in different geographic areas throughout town. And so, we got a lot of really great feedback. Folks do want to see more development. I think that they like the development that we have, but I think they certainly recognize that it can be enhanced. Our TOD study really spent a lot of time kind of talking about the fact that, multifamily is something that we need in our housing supply generally, for Fairfielders who are transitionally going through different life experiences. I think we hear this across Connecticut generally, that folks are stuck. Yes, they could sell their house now at quite a good profit, but where do they go? And so we don't have enough of those opportunities for families and smaller households to go. So I think our residents certainly recognize that diversifying housing in a lot of different ways, and Glenn has been working on our housing study, just to be clear, that's something that we need to kind of cultivate within Fairfield. Again, we are fortunate in Fairfield that we have 3 train stations, 2 of which we'd like to target for more transit-oriented development. Certainly one that is more of a blank slate, and another one where we have to really do kind of intentional infill. So, that's been exciting to be able to engage the community in that conversation. Infrastructure is a big part of like where we can do things, where we should be doing things looking forward. A POCD is, it's a visionary tool that looks forward by about 10 years. And we've got sea level rise. We're a coastal community, so we are also a bit hampered by where we're going to be impacted in the years to come. So we have to balance, all of these considerations as we move forward in terms of determining where, where best to place future development. In terms of connectivity, we've got really strong local engagement by committees within Fairfield, and we've got a whole separate bike ped committee, and mobility matters. And I would say that, in between the time that we actually did our, very well attended public workshops, we had the pandemic. And, what we learned in that pandemic is mobility matters even more. Folks want to be able to independently get to places within their community, the amenities that they have, the resources that they have. So, we need to figure out how to do that better for our community, which I'm going to put a pin in that in terms of why that matters in terms of state and regional POCDs, because mobility is not provincial to your community, right? You have to kind of, the locational guide map, it really does focus on placing, you can see the little key map on the left. And I'm going to put my little bright pink cursor over there next to this little arrow as well. But, Fairfield is such a small community in the entire state of Connecticut, right? I will disclose that I worked for South Central Regional Council of Governments when the first locational guide map came out. And whew, that was exciting. People were really upset. Some people were really excited. Some people were really ticked off that the state could say, well, we think you should do this, or we think you shouldn't do this. But to be honest, the state needs to think about where we protect our water supply. We need to think about, especially when municipalities have issues with their wastewater treatment facilities and then look to the state to help them out. We have to be sensible as a state as to where we reinvest in, some of those larger infrastructure categories, whether it's state, expanding state roads, those types of things. That the state is not an unlimited piggy bank for the rest of us. So, state and regional POCDs matter quite a bit. We're mandated to be consistent, as Glenn and Kyle both mentioned. I think the growth management principles was really kind of a redirection for resources, both at the state level and kind of thinking about how that feeds into the regions and then feeds down locally. And then also, how are we best going to be poised to ensure that our communities don't fail, because we don't have those state dollars that can be funneled down to the regions in order to fund, some of the infrastructure management that we need to be performed long-term. The other part of this too is, we're kind of at a competitive disadvantage here in the state of Connecticut, because we've got, 9 metropolitan planning agencies, right? 9 or 7, I'm sorry, I probably misspoke. But, whereas, when I worked in Southern California, you have Los Angeles County and San Bernardino County that have 1 metropolitan planning organization. So, unfortunately, what that means is when we compete for federal dollars that then are allocated through state and regional council of governments and MPOs, we're not super competitive because, our regions are very small and our state is really small. Also for us, when you look at some of the demographics for Fairfield, we don't house people, employ them here. We are part of a greater area than just ourselves. So we need to think about how we're connected to each other. We need to think about those resources that we rely on pretty heavily in our neighboring urban centers like Bridgeport and Norwalk. Those are where our hospitals are based. Those are where our cultural institutions are based. Our courts are, our government, a lot of our larger government functions. And to be honest, we're connected by transportation that we don't control locally, but we rely on very heavily. So, how this feeds into the planning documents that then unlocks funding opportunities for us matters quite a bit. I'll just disclose, and this is my last slide, that I did a webinar today with the federal DOT as they're getting ready to distribute some of the bipartisan infrastructure funds. And, the name of the webinar had to do with connectivity. How do we connect our places? How do we reconnect some of the things that have been disconnected by our transportation infrastructure? And to be honest, when you look at Fairfield's demographics, we don't have disadvantaged communities within our boundaries. We don't qualify for a lot of this funding. And as regions, we're going to have to pair up in order to qualify for some of this funding, right? We have a large service economy within Fairfield. We've got tons of restaurants, we've got tons of retail. And a lot of those folks who work in those businesses are not Fairfield residents. So we need to kind of continue to figure out how to best get the employees that we host here within our community to those employment centers in a way that is, time effective for them, cost effective for them. So we're not the island of Fairfield. We are connected. And if we don't start to figure this out as a state, as regions, and unfortunately, I think for Bridgeport, we probably should be part of a bigger region, but we're not. We're going to be at a disadvantage in terms of really maintaining the resources within our state if we don't start to figure this out. So that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Emmeline, for your presentation and for all your work on behalf of Fairfield. I am happy to be able to say that to you. And batting cleanup, speaking of connections and our neighbors, I love that Emmeline actually used the example of the Fairfield Metro train station, which really serves the people of Fairfield and Bridgeport and beyond. But Lynn, hey, from Bridgeport, welcome, and turning it over to you.
Thank you. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation like everybody else, but I'm still going to talk. And I agree with so many things that Kyle, Glenn, and Emmeline said. So in Bridgeport, our POCD, we just kind of do it ourselves. I mean, we acknowledge that there's a state POCD, but we let the consultant that's hired make sure it conforms. And we let the COG make sure it conforms. We just do our thing because we do feel that it doesn't matter what we do. We can do it because the state doesn't really care. Sorry, but we feel like we're just the redheaded stepchild in the state. So for us, we started out, we did it a lot differently. This last time we went out to the community because we were always getting the same people. So much like Kyle's doing the Planapalooza, which I think is a great term, we were going out to events that were already organized. So the Juneteenth Festival, the Puerto Rican Day Parade. We just went out and did and set up a table. And so we got a lot of different people and a lot of different voices. And we were very open about it. And so the way we interacted with the community was making them invested in the plan. So it's a community's plan. It's not a plan for anybody else. And we didn't talk about housing just as housing. We talk about things as they're interconnected. We actually use the APA POCD guide, master plan guide. And that's what we use to format our plan. So I will share with you, if I can find it. Well, I don't know. I can't find it on my screen. Well, I will. Here we go. There, you can see so planbridgeport.com. This is our plan and it's online. And we have our guiding principles are this. They're not housing, environment, whatever. They're about living in a robust city, having a good economy, being equitable. And so like housing is addressed in each of these set chapters, but it's addressed differently each time because it's addressed according to what that topic is, which is really important because many people just see housing, and I keep using housing, but that's an easy example, right? Many people just see housing. Well, I like it. I don't. I just want single family. I don't want the multifamily, whatever. But we were talking about it in a much different way. And so you'll see it as it goes throughout the plan. And then speaking to the implementation, we actually have, here you go. We have, you can sort by filters, and then you can see. So here are the organizations. Here's how we're doing on it. So you can see what we're doing with each of the goals. So that's what Bridgeport's doing. We have a really small COG, as Emmeline said. There's only 6 towns in that COG. So ridiculous. But on the other hand, they are so responsive to each of us, and it is awesome. And I think they're great, and they do a really good job. And I recognize that if we were in a larger cog, that wouldn't be the case. So I'm kind of torn, do we get into a bigger cog or not? There's pluses and minuses to both sides. But from the state POCD side, because we're a major city, they say we're a growth area, whatever, it applies, no matter what the state says, it's going to work for us. So there's really no big deal for us on what the state POCD says. Do I agree with everything it says for the rest of the state? Well, that's debatable, and we're not here to talk about that. But when you look at the state statutes, 8-23 talks about the municipal POCDs. Did you know that in 22A 102, we also have to report our municipal POCDs to DEEP? Wouldn't have guessed that unless you knew about it or somehow fell upon it. I mean, that's ridiculous that it's not all in the same section. So we never did, because I didn't know about it until after the fact. So there's a suggestion for you. So I don't know what else I can say, but I really agree with what Glenn said, that, and Emmeline, that there really needs to be more direction from the state. It's just not, one community cannot address issues that are not community based. Housing. Why does everyone want to shove all the housing in Bridgeport? Even the affordable housing. That shouldn't be only up to Bridgeport to provide that. Bridgeport has 48% of its land mass non-taxed, because we provide the courts and the hospitals and colleges and other things that we don't get a fair reimbursement on. So we're providing services to a region, and everyone's using our infrastructure to use those services, but there's just no equity there. So the state really needs to step up. That's my spiel.
There, I see people with the clapping emoji. And thank you, Lynn. And I appreciate very much that folks are sharing perspectives from experience in different types of communities around the state. Obviously, Lynn, you're coming from a city, a large city, our largest currently, although I suspect population-wise, that's probably not for long. We're probably going to see Stanford, I would bet, surpass, but we'll see when that happens. But also, Glenn, your experience in communities of many different sizes, and Emmeline and Kyle in our larger towns, and the messages are very similar across. But just in terms of folks who listening in, are there questions, comments, reactions to what people have had to say today? Kevin.
I felt bad going first, but I had a few reactions. I really appreciate everybody, both the work that you're doing and your presentations here today. I thought, I mean, there's just an enormous amount of work that goes into all of this, and so I'm just very grateful for that. And Lynn, obviously coming from New Haven, a lot of that same feeling of we're, providing all of these services to a larger region, but so little of the housing stock is centered there, so little of the sort of, so much is concentrated just in our largest cities. And part of the discussion about a larger plan of conservation and development has to contemplate the severe challenges of, or the desperate need for us to change that. And my question was for Emmeline, because I think for all of the towns, obviously, I think Fairfield is one that has the biggest uphill battle in trying to accomplish these goals. And you were talking, and I actually didn't know the history with the history with the POCD and how you're sort of working off of a hybrid between something from 2000 and something from 2013. Do you have the challenge of being a planner and knowing a sort of thoughtful way to actually develop or plan a town? Do you come up against the politics fairly often in terms of there's a lot of areas in Fairfield that make total sense to allow as of right multifamily housing, but the local board is not going to approve that? Is that something that you come up against quite often? And is there a way for the state to play a more active role in trying to ensure that that sensible planning actually is put in place?
Well, I will disclose that we've actually hired a consultant, so I'm hoping the consultant can do some of the heavy lift in terms of getting yelled at a little bit. But I will say that, because we have so many competing interests, for example, we have some as of right middle housing zoning that's permitted within an area that's going to be deeply impacted by sea level rise. We need to kind of rezone areas that are probably closer to metro to accept more density. And it makes sense, right? I mean, we're creating a pedestrian oriented, walkable community that at some point is going to be connected by a pedestrian bridge to, the great restaurants and businesses in Black Rock. So it's really going to become kind of like a regional area. And so it kind of, by that definition, it should have higher density housing. I think, one of the things that our consultant said to us off the bat was, wow, you guys have done some really great outreach work, but you haven't connected everything together yet. So, you haven't really kind of very expressly said, well, we have to do this because we've got X number of households that, oh, by the way, we're going to lose to, really regular sea level rise and, sunny day flooding impacts. You need to kind of relocate that population a little bit and start to kind of put your feet in the direction of making some, adaptation changes, right? So, I think that once we have a consultant who can kind of, let me back up and say that we've got a very highly educated community. 30% of our population has higher degrees, right? And master's degrees, actually. So, I think when we spend the time to really talk through issues with the Fairfield constituency, through repeat messaging and kind of connecting those dots, believe it or not, because of our very involved constituency, those folks who are there in the room, they respond to that information. They like the information. So, of course, in any public hearing, you're going to get the folks who are not intellectual, but emotional about change. And, as Glenn said, change is hard. We get tons of calls during a construction project, but then when it's done, complaints are over. And they go, oh, that was not so bad, right? So, there's always going to be a little bit of heartburn with a change. I don't think that any planning, it's very challenging to have a planning effort where you don't have any naysayers. Our TOD plan actually in Metro Center was really well engaged and folks who were very supportive. So, I think in terms of development, that's where a good portion of it's going to go. But we have there's a train station there. Totally makes sense. We've got a little bit of a blank slate. We've got great infill opportunities. So I think there's a lot of positive things that we can focus on. And, this only covers 10 years, and 10 years development takes time. So even the things that we're planning for now, even the things that have already been approved, those aren't going to be built for 3 years. Some of that housing that we're looking to introduce, that's not going to be built for 6 to 8 years, just because development takes time for the developers themselves, right? So I think it's incremental. When you plan, it's incremental.
Emmeline, thanks for that. And I think, again, back to that idea of how does this tie into the state plan, and how does this connect with, we'll talk more at future meetings about the regional plan, but certainly, the issue of how we balance those overarching views of connection versus those individual views and communities is definitely a challenge that we face. But I think you're right. Part of doing this, having this very group, is to continue to have these conversations and help to educate one another and understand the intricacies of these issues and help to educate our community members. SN?
Awesome. Emmeline, Glenn, Lynn, and Kyle's gone at Planapalooza. I do love that. I just want to make sure that's said by another planner that that's such a fabulous name, and wonderful. But anywho, thank you all for presenting. I always love hearing how other communities are working through their POCDs and where they are. It's the fun part of it's a difficult part, but it's one of the more fun parts about what we get to do as planners. And so thank you for your presentations. I think being a part of this group, we thought our charge was just process, and I feel like the snowball has been growing as it's rolled down the hill as we continuously meet. And I think in the last few meetings, we realized that some people were having a procedural conversation and some people were having a substantive one, and they really wanted to see what's in the state plan change. I think we need to address both of what it could include, but then also the process of doing so. And having everyone who spoke today, it kind of highlights that although the connection between the municipal plan of conservation and development and the state plan is clear, there's room to grow, there's room to make the connection stronger, and there's ways that we can provide recommendations that make it so while communities, there's freedom to do whatever we want, and there's freedom to know that we often will be consistent with the state plan. How can we strengthen the plan do we want it to support municipalities and having that flexibility, or does the state want to be visionary? Does it want to say, you need to do X, Y, and Z, or you need to consider these principles in a deeper way that we currently are? Because we've talked about this at prior meetings, but Glenn had it perfectly on the slide. We have the carrot of if it's not consistent, you might lose discretionary funding, but is that truly the best strategy? Or are there other strategies that we should be looking at? I know we're going to see what other states do in future meetings, and I'm really interested in seeing or hearing from a state or understanding. And there are places in which if your plan of conservation and development is not consistent with what you're proposing as zoning regulations, it's void, it doesn't work, you're not allowed to do that. And that's not something we have on the municipal level, where it's an advisory document. So your planning commission might say it is consistent, or sometimes they don't and they still adopt zone changes. And so I'd like to see ways in which the state can help municipalities use the tool of zoning. So I view the POCD as my planning hat. That's where it's located in the statute. But how can we make those connections clearer? How can we have the state document serve the needs that the municipal documents are playing? Lynn, the Bridgeport plan is beautiful. We want to find the things that the municipalities are doing well that we can encourage across the board. Kyle told us we want more visually appealing documents. I know we can't require that statewide, but how can we pull different aspects of what's going right in places where people aren't doing things right to encourage better municipal POCDs? So I think this conversation, again, it bridges where we're trying to go. And I view it as both a substantive and a procedural thing, because we need to make the connection between the two documents clear, but we also don't want to veer off making the state plan something so different that municipalities, again, with the locational growth map, being like, what's going on? How do we do this? Where are we going? So thank you for everyone for sharing what you do, because you have great plans and you are great planners. And so it helps us make better recommendations.
Thank you for that, SN. Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much for all those presentations. I really enjoyed listening to all that. Just building on that last comment, I want to provide just a quick municipal legislative perspective. One thing that I've been hearing from at least our own planning department, and it's probably just as much the case for other similar or even smaller towns. Newtown is definitely not one of the smallest towns, but the resources it has relative to some other municipalities is somewhat less. And one thing I hear from the planning departments is, that I think they would welcome either, planning assistance or other support from either the COGS or from the state itself, and that there is more that they would be willing to do and undertake, if they had additional resources. And there are obviously some things are going to be politically controversial in town, but I do think there's more that could be done at a municipal level. And to some extent, it's not just a political limitation, but also a resource limitation. And the more that these things can be publicized, can be brought up ahead of time, maybe some of that opposition can be dealt with and essentially addressed ahead of time. So just another statement in support of increasing resources and guidance for municipalities. I think that's something we could definitely use.
Harley, thank you for that comment. And I meant to comment earlier when Emmeline was talking about the TOD in Fairfield. Forgive the Fairfield heavy commentary here, folks, but that was through a state planning grant that we were able to access those additional resources, because I can tell you, I have a pretty good sense, and it's really only a partial sense, about how hard Emmeline and her colleagues in her department work here in Fairfield and how much they need to take care of. And sometimes, you have to respond to the immediacy of the moment. And some of these other bigger picture items they're a lot to address. And so I think that's a very good point that you've made, and I appreciate that. Lynn, and then Glenn, and then Stuart.
So continuing that theme, it's a lot easier at the local level to deal with the opposition if it's more than just the local people trying to push that idea. If it's state down, there is no argument. Just food for thought. And I also want to digress just a bit. At the last meeting, or one of the previous two meetings, there was a question on whose plan is this? Is it the legislature's plan? Or, whose state plan is this? Well, I don't think it's the legislature's plan. I think it's the executive branch's plan, because it's the legislature has to create the authority for the executive branch to require these plans. So I just wanted to clarify that, at the municipal level, we can't do anything unless we have the authority to do it through our municipal ordinance or through the state legislation. So the legislature doesn't have a plan. This is an OPM plan. So thanks.
I'm chuckling to myself a little.
Hang on 1 second, Glenn. Sorry. This is, I think I've said this, trying to take some notes and facilitate too. This is the thing that you just said, Lynn. I would love, Glenn, if you're willing in your comments to react to that as well. But that's a significant point of conversation that we need to have. And I think it goes back to what Glenn talked about earlier, which was the level of specificity in the maps and the requirements by that continuing committee to make ongoing adjustments. And I think it's a valid question, because the continuing committee is very clearly a legislative committee. And this, from a process standpoint, I bring this up because passing the state plan was so difficult, in part because that continuing committee is not a standing committee of the legislature. And part of what happened in one of the years, there was a process question raised by a member about referral of the plan directly to the legislature, as opposed to going through the standing committee of planning and development. This may all seem very wonky, but it's one of the reasons why we just now have adopted the plan that we're, well into. So I think that's, we'll have to circle back to that conversation. And then now I'll turn it over to you, Glenn.
Yeah, just so, what's the saying? Those who forget history are condemned to repeat it. Honestly, 30 years ago, there was a task force appointed by the legislatures to study state, regional, and local land use planning. It ended up, I think it was Public Act 91-392 or 395, something like that. But there was a task force that worked on this for quite some time, and the issue became one of opening lines of communication up from municipalities to the state and from the state back down. But it wasn't one person in charge or one organization or one level in charge. But the question, in a sense, in Connecticut at that time, and perhaps even still today, is we had some silos. And we had all this capacity, but it wasn't well focused or directed. So I laughed when I think some of the recommendations that might have been in that report. And so I don't know if John Rappa is still at OLR, but he was involved in that committee, and we had long conversations about planning and everything else. But there might be some value in there just to kind of look back if there's any records on that particular one. So I throw that out there, maybe even for some humor. In terms of that situation. The second thing I wanted to build on what Lynn had said, because we have this situation currently with the affordable housing plans. The requirement came from the state. You have to do this. There's one mandate. It's 7 operative words in the statute. But the communities I've had the opportunity to work with have taken this very seriously and tried to find ways that they can work on this strategy, accomplish what the state wants to accomplish, but do it their way. And to me, I've just been pretty tickled really by the effort put forth. And I hope that the results will happen as communities start to tackle this issue. And in a sense, that can be a model, I think, for the relationships going forward. If the state can lead the way and say, listen, we think that in the future, Connecticut's aging demographic is perhaps going to have implications for our revenue stream. So we need to think about blank. And then the communities can actually start to think about that as part of their plans. I mean, I'm working with some communities now on the rollout of EV charging stations. And how do we accomplish the state's goals here in ways that work for the municipalities? And there's no clear source of direction, but if there was something going on at the state level to kind of push communities in that direction, oh my God, we're going to unleash 169 different entities trying to help and figure that out. So I think the relationships, I think we're all in the same team. If we can figure out how to coordinate those efforts to unleash the potential that all of our organizations have, that'd be wonderful. So thank you again.
Thank you, Glenn. Mr. Beckett, and since you were not able to introduce yourself earlier, can you just do that now before you speak? That would be great. Then Lynn. And can you have to unmute. Oh, you're still muted.
Sorry.
There you go. Got it.
I had to go down to Florida, so I was listening while I'm driving on I-4. So anyway, I'm Chip Beckett. I was on the Glastonbury Town Council for 15 years. I was chairman for 6 years. I was chairman of CROG for 3 years, among other things. So that's my background and my interest in this. I'm very interested in how we work as regions. I heard some people talk about, no town is on an island to itself. Glastonbury is about the size of Newtown. And everybody, but I think a lot of our residents that oppose things talk about, it's not my baseball field, it's not my elementary school, I'm therefore opposed to it. They don't think about, they go to the mall, they go to the theater, they go to the airport. So I think we have to have a much stronger, at least regional focus on how do we meld all these plans together so that we have alternative transportation as well as highways and buses and trains. Glastonbury will never have an international airport or a train station intercity, but we need to be able to get to those in other towns. So I think those are things that we need to take a much stronger hand on. I do think, as Glenn said, things like electric vehicles, affordable housing, different towns are going to have a different take on it, but I think we do have to give some direction about this is what we want to do. And there'll be a spectrum of things. Goshen will be very different than Bridgeport or Hartford for how they approach it. But so there's got to be some alternatives in there, because I've heard people talk about wastewater treatment and stuff, they can't do anything. I think we have to have the state recognize what those limitations are. Can't have septic systems in a high density housing next to a reservoir. So thanks.
Thank you. And the sewerage working group of the commission is meeting next week, I think. But you're right, all these things are connected. Lynn and then Kevin.
In Bridgeport, we included the Regional Plan Association's 4th regional plan in our POCD. There were several recommendations that they made for Bridgeport that we adopted. I wonder if the state is even aware or has read or has it brought into the state POCD anything that the RPA has recommended for Connecticut, because they recommend a huge amount of growth in the state. But the way that we're set up right now, we're not going to come anywhere close to that. So it's more than just the state thinking about itself. It's us working with our surrounding areas. You know, maybe the lower half of the state is, well, that's where part of the New York metro area. The eastern half of the state is part of a different metro area, but we have to be cognizant of what's going on in those metro areas. So that's something that we need to be thinking about. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate what you're saying, which is we are connected to each other by town, but we're also connected by state. I often call our state Connecticut. We literally have connect as part of our name. That's what we do. We connect the states within, you know, our region, and that's a really important part of our identity. Kevin.
Thank you. And one of the things that I just wanted to mention, just in talking about the regional level and the, so I think there was a comment made, I think Glenn made it, which was that we are all in this together and we're working towards a common goal. And I sincerely believe the folks on this working group really are. I think it's also important to recognize that the state has a role in interfering when there are bad actors in this equation. And I do think that there are very clear examples, both historically and contemporary, where there are towns, regional governments that are acting directly in conflict with the goals of actually growing and desegregating and planning in a sensible way. The draft recommendations for, I believe it's WestCog's affordable housing plan suggested paying cities to concentrate housing. And recommendations like that are genuinely just quite egregious to what the goals that we're sort of working towards are, in just, hey, we'll pay you money to keep your people over there. And so I do think that part of, and the reason that I use that example is because I think there is a point where the state's POCD needs to seriously contemplate the way that it can intervene when cities and towns are not acting in the way that they should be. And I use, even for the example of New Haven, a lot of our zoning regulations right now, we have been struggling for the past 2 years. We've updated a lot of them, but we still have years worth of work to really reform them. And one of the things that we were doing was allowing ADUs as of right. And when the state passed that legislation, it helped us enormously. It took something that was taking us months, probably over a year, to actually try to get across the finish line, and helped us achieve it much more quickly because it was a much better idea than what we currently had in place. And so I think the state has not only the resources, but the collective representative government of the entire state that can make the decisions of, hey, what is currently in place does not make sense for all of the residents of our state. It is hurting the people in those towns that have a lack of this housing. It's hurting people in the towns that do have housing, but not enough, and their prices are going up because of it. So it's just, I just think it's really important that the state has both that role in this and the enforcement mechanism to intervene when places are not acting the way that they need to.
Kevin, I appreciate your comments. And as we know, that is an incredibly challenging thing to accomplish right now in particular, I think. Emmeline, and then I'm gonna ask us to do a speed round. Indeed, we are coming up on our 5:30, but Emmeline, we'll let you have the last word, and then I'm, like I said, going to ask for a speed round a la Brene Brown for any of you who listen to her podcast.
Maybe this will cover it. I mean, I do think that with the state POCD, we also can't as a state be provincial. And I appreciate your comment about Connecticut kind of being the bridge between a lot of different, kind of metro region areas and mega regional areas. I mean, half of the state works in Massachusetts, right? If they're close to the Massachusetts border, they're working in biotech up there. Sometimes they're working for colleges and universities if you're in the northern strip of the state. A lot of folks, I mean, the reason why, Fairfield's median income is so high is because a lot of those folks now, probably a good part remotely, they're working in New York City's, financial sector. So we're, I think the state POCD needs to do a couple of different things. It needs to understand our context within a greater geography, because we are such a small state, both in terms of population. We're only 3.6 million people, right? So, and, when again, we compete against other places for federal dollars, whether it's transportation, housing related, we need to speak the same language as those places that are competitive for the resources that we need to best grow our communities, protect our natural resources. We're not able to compete if we don't look outside of ourselves, see what some of that policy says, and direct our policy documents to address where that funding's coming from, right? So, because we're a small state.
We punch above our weight, but we certainly are. And I think we're going to see what you're talking about in real time when we begin to see the rollout of some of these HF funds and what the competitive grants are that are being directed to municipalities and municipal regions. And we're going to find out exactly how important it is to have those plans in place to be able to roll those projects out and make them happen. So just in the last 5 minutes, I'm going to give you just a minute to think, if you would, about, your 1 or 2 word, or at most 3 word answer to the question of, given what the conversation has been today, and to that connection between the state plan and the municipal planning process. And I recognize we've been talking about regions. We're going to talk more specifically about them in the future with Aaron as well. But what is kind of the 1 word that comes to mind in terms of your aspirations for the connection between that state plan and the municipal planning process? So I'll give you a few seconds to think about that. And not everyone, as in my youth ministry and social work days, not everyone has to participate. You certainly can pass, but so just with the quick speed round, I'll just go around the screen so you don't have to raise hands, and just say pass if you don't want to. So I'll start with you, Emmeline.
I would say consistency and compatibility.
Thank you. Consistency and compatibility. Glenn? Oh, you have to unmute.
I'm sorry. I think my words would be connected conversations. I think, I don't know how that happens. I don't want it to be top down or bottom up. I think it needs to be almost like a vortex or something like that of connected conversations.
Connected conversations. Awesome. Charlie, I see you're unmuted.
Oh, yeah, just gonna maybe simplicity or clarity. I think often individual town plans get bogged down in a lot of detail, which varies from town to town, and keeping things simple and straightforward makes it a lot easier to discuss these topics.
Great, thank you. SN?
I want to see clearer directives, and I want to see more aspirational directives.
Cool, clear and aspirational. Mr. Beckett, how about you?
I would say coordination of all these plans and implementation so we get something done instead of putting it on the shelf.
Great, coordination and implementation. Kevin?
Actually build housing.
Oh, ABCs, okay. Lynn?
Ditto.
There you go. All right. How about you, Eric? You have to unmute.
Sorry about that. I had to switch to my phone because my laptop battery is dead and it wasn't charged. My words would be education and communication. I think those are two things we need to do at the state level much better than we do now.
Wonderful. And I would add more resources.
That too.
And that wasn't meant to just you, Eric, but that's all of us. I really do think that part of this conversation is about truly understanding not just our residents and the people who live in communities, but our policymakers, what the importance and value of the planning process is. And I think that's part of what we're trying to do with this whole commission, is to really enhance those conversations. We are a quote part-time legislature, and I think that having all of you here and having these conversations is really valuable. I know that we were going to touch base about meeting in person versus Zoom. I think we're going to defer that conversation, and Aaron and I will touch base about that, and perhaps with all of you via email, just logistically. I think the general hope was that we would be able to gather in person so that we can actually get to meet one another. And I would imagine that's still our hope. We just have to secure places and figure out the logistics on that. So as we close up, just we'll note that our next meeting is scheduled for June 9th. I will share the reason we were bumped last week to this week was because there can only be so many Zooms at once. And there's another group that is meeting every other Thursday at the same time. And that's something, we'll talk a little bit more about logistics at our next meeting again, when Aaron and I can be here together and we can share some of those, including some changes to the legislation that bumps out our date a little bit. So we'll get to that next time. I want to say thank you again to our presenters. Glenn signed off. I'll have to send him a note, but also Emmeline and Lynn and Kyle. We were very fortunate to have your expertise and experience here in the Zoom room. And with that, we will adjourn. Thank you all so much.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Thank you all.
Bye, folks. Take care.